You look like an intelligent boy. You see what you're in. Tell me about this thing. Don't let those Reds fool you into saying you're not guilty. I'm talking to you straight as I talk to a son of mine. Sign a confession and get this over with. Bigger said nothing. He sat looking at the floor. Was Jan mixed up in this? Bigger heard the faint, excited sound of mob voices coming through the concrete walls of the building. He proved an alibi and he's free. Tell me, did he leave you holding the bag? Bigger heard the faraway clang of a streetcar. If he made you do it, then sign a complaint against him. Bigger saw the shining tip of the man's black shoes, the sharp creases in his striped trousers, the clear icy glinting in the eyeglasses high upon his long nose. Boy, said Buckley in a voice so loud that Bigger flinched. Where's Bessie? Bigger's eyes widened. He had not thought of Bessie but once since his capture. Her death was unimportant beside that of Mary's. He knew that when they killed him it would be for Mary's death, not Bessie's. Well, boy, we found her. You hit her with a brick, but she didn't die right away. Bigger's muscles jerked him to his feet. Bessie's alive? But the voice droned on and he sat down. She tried to get out of that air shaft, but she couldn't. She froze to death. We got the brick you hit her with. We got the blanket and the quilt and the pillows you took from her room. We got a letter from her purse she had written to you and hadn't mailed. A letter telling you she didn't want to go through with trying to collect the ransom money. You see, boy, we got you. Come on now, tell me all about it. Bigger said nothing. He buried his face in his hands. You raped her, didn't you? Well, if you won't tell about Bessie, then tell me about the woman you raped and choked to death over on University Avenue last fall. Was the man trying to scare him, or did he really think he had done other killings? Boy, you might as well just tell me. We got a line on you all you ever did. And how about the girl you attacked in Jackson Park last summer? Listen, boy, when you were in your cell sleeping and wouldn't talk, we brought women in to identify you. 2 women swore complaints against you. One was the sister of the woman you killed last fall, Mrs. Clinton. The other woman, Miss Ashton, said you attacked her last summer by climbing through the window of her bedroom. I ain't bothered no woman last summer or last fall either, Bigger said. Miss Ashton identified you. She swears you're the one. I don't know nothing about it. But Mrs. Clinton, the sister of the woman you killed last fall, came to your cell and pointed you out. Who'll believe you when you say you didn't do it? You killed and raped 2 women in 2 days. Who'll believe you when you say you didn't rape and kill the others? Come on, boy, you haven't had a chance of holding out. I don't know nothing about other women, Bigger repeated stubbornly. Bigger wondered how much did the man really know. Was he lying about the other women in order to get him to tell about Mary and Bessie? Or were they really trying to pin other crimes upon him? Boy, when the newspapers get a hold of what we've got on you, you're cooked. I'm not the one who's doing this. The police department is digging up the dirt and bringing it to me. Why don't you talk? Did you kill the other woman? Or did somebody make you do it? Was Jan in this business? Were the Reds helping you? You're a fool if Jan was mixed up in this and you won't tell. Bigger shifted his feet and listened to the faint clang of another streetcar passing. The man leaned forward, caught hold of Bigger's arms, and spoke while shaking him. You're hurting nobody but yourself holding out like this, boy. Tell me where Mary, Bessie, and Mrs. Clinton's sister, and Miss Ashton, the only other women you raped or killed? The words burst out of Bigger. I never heard of no Miss Clinton or Miss Ashton before. Didn't you attack a girl in Jackson Park last summer? Nah. Didn't you choke and rape a woman on University Avenue last fall? Nah. Didn't you climb through a window out in Inglewood last fall and rape a woman? Nah, I tell you I didn't. You're not telling the truth, boy. Lying won't get you anywhere. I am telling the truth. Whose idea was the kidnap note? Jan's? He didn't have nothing to do with it, said Bigger, feeling a keen desire on the man's part to have him implicate Jan. What's the use of your holding out, boy? Make it easy for yourself. Why not talk and get it over with? They knew he was guilty. They could prove it. If he did not talk, then they would say he had committed every crime they could think of. Boy, why didn't you and your pals rob Blum's store like you planned to last Saturday? Bigger looked at him in surprise. They had found that out, too. You didn't think I knew about that, did you? I know a lot more, boy. I know about that dirty trick you and your friend Jack pulled off in the Regal Theater, too. You wonder how I know? The manager told us when you were checking up. I know what the boys like you do, Bigger. Now, come on. You wrote that kidnap note, didn't you? Yeah, he sighed. I wrote it. Who helped you? Nobody. Who was going to help you collect the ransom money? Bessie. Come on, was it Jan? Nah. Bessie? Yeah. Then why did you kill her? Nervously, Bigger's fingers fumbled with a pack of cigarettes and got one out. The man struck a match and held light for him, but he struck his own match and ignored the offered flame. When I saw I couldn't get the money, I killed her to keep her from talking, he said. And you killed Mary too? I didn't mean to kill her, but it don't matter now, he said. Did you lay her? Nah. You laid Bessie before you killed her. The doctor said so. And now you expect me to believe you didn't lay Mary? I didn't. Did Jan? Nah. Didn't Jan lay her first and then you? Nah. But Jan wrote the kidnap note, didn't he? I never saw Jan before that night. But didn't he write the note? Nah. I tell you he didn't. You wrote the note? Yeah. Didn't Jan tell you to write it? Nah. Why did you kill Mary? He did not answer. See here, boy, what you say doesn't make sense. You were never in the Dalton home until Saturday night. Yet in one night, a girl was raped, killed, burned, and the next night, a kidnapped note is sent. Come on, tell me everything that happened and about everybody who helped you. There wasn't nobody but me. I don't care what happens to me, but you can't make me say things about other people. But you told Mr. Dalton that Jan was in this thing, too. I was trying to blame it on him. Well, come on, tell me everything that happened. Bigger rose and went to the window. His hands caught the cold steel bars in a hard grip. He knew as he stood there that he could never tell why he had killed. It was not that he did not really want to tell, but the telling of it would have involved an explanation of his entire life. The actual killing of Mary and Bessie was not what concerned him most. It was knowing and feeling that he could never make anybody know what had driven him to it. His crimes were known, but he had never felt before he committed them would be known. He would have gladly admitted to guilt if he had thought that in doing it. So he could have also given in the same breath a sense of the deep, choking hate that had been his life, a hate that he had not wanted to have but could not help having. How could he do that? The impulsion to try to tell was as deep as the urge to kill. He felt a hand touch his shoulder. He did not turn around. His eyes looked downward and saw the man's gleaming black shoes. I know how you feel, boy. You're colored and you feel that you haven't had a square deal, don't you? The man's voice came low and soft. And Bigger, listening, hated him for telling what he knew was true. He rested his tired head against the steel bars and wondered how much it was possible for this man to know so much about him and yet be so bitterly against him. Maybe you've been brooding about this color question a long time, huh, boy? The man's voice continued low and soft. Maybe you think I don't understand, but I do. I know how it feels to walk along the streets like other people, dressed like them, talking like them, and yet excluded for no reason except that you're black. I know your people, why they give me votes out there on the south side every election. I once talked to a colored boy who raped and killed a woman, just like you raped and killed Mrs. Clinton's sister. I didn't do it, Bigger screamed. Why keep saying that? If you talk, maybe the judges will help you. Confess it all and get it over with. You'll feel better. Say, listen, if you tell me everything, I'll see that you're sent to a hospital for an examination, see? If they say you're not responsible, then maybe you won't have to die. Bigger's anger rose. He was not crazy, and he did not want to be called crazy. I don't want to go to no hospital. It's a way out for you, boy. I don't want no way out. Listen, start at the beginning. Who was the first woman you ever killed? He said nothing. He wanted to talk, but he did not like the note of intense eagerness in the man's voice. He heard the door open behind him. He turned his head just in time to see another white man looking in questioningly. I thought you wanted me, the man said. Yes, come on in, Buckley said. The man came in and took a seat, holding a pencil and paper on his knee. Here, Bigger, Buckley said, taking Bigger by the arm. Sit down here and tell me all about it. Get it over with. Bigger wanted to tell how he had felt when Jan had held his hand, how Mary had made him feel when she asked him about how Negroes lived, the tremendous excitement that had hold of him during the day and night when he'd been in the Dalton home, but there were no words for him. You went to Mr. Dalton's home at 5:30 that Saturday, didn't you? Yes, sir, he mumbled. Listlessly he talked. He traced his every action. He paused at each question Buckley asked and wondered how he could link up his bare actions with what he had felt. But his words came out flat and dull. White men were looking at him, waiting for his words, and all the feelings of his body vanished, just as they had when he was in the car between Jan and Mary. When he was through, he felt more lost and undone than when he was captured. Buckley stood up. The other white man rose and held out the papers for him to sign. He took the pen in his hand. Well, why shouldn't he sign? He was guilty. He was lost. They were going to kill him. Nobody could help him. They were standing in front of him, bending over him, looking at him, waiting. His hand shook. He signed. Buckley slowly folded the papers and put them into his pocket. Bigger looked up at the two men, helplessly, wonderingly. Bucky looked at the other white man and smiled. That was not as hard as I thought it would be, Buckley said. He came through like a clock, the other man said. Buckley looked down at Bigger and said, just a scared colored boy from Mississippi. There was a short silence. Bigger felt that they had forgotten him already. Then he heard them speaking. Anything else, Chief? No, I'll be at my club. Let me know how the inquest turns out. Okay, Chief. So long. I'll be seeing you, Chief. Bigger felt so empty and beaten that he slid to the floor. He heard the feet of the men walking away softly. The door opened and shut. He was alone, profoundly, inescapably. He rolled on the floor and sobbed, wondering what it had been that had hold of him, why he was here. He lay on the cold floor sobbing, but really he was standing up strongly with contrite heart, holding his life in his hands, staring at it with a wondering question. He lay on the cold floor sobbing, but really he was pushing forward with his puny strength against a world too big and too strong for him. He lay on the cold floor sobbing, but really he was groping forward with fierce zeal into a welter of circumstances which he felt contained a water of mercy for the thirst of his heart and brain. He wept because he had once again trusted his feelings, and they betrayed him. Why should he have felt the need to try to make his feelings known? And why did not he hear the resounding echoes of his feelings in the hearts of others? There were times when he did hear echoes, but always they were couched in tones which, living as a Negro, could not answer or accept without losing face with the world which had first evoked in him that song of manhood. He feared and hated the preacher because the preacher had told him to bow down and ask for mercy he knew he needed. But his pride would never let him do that, not this side of the grave, not while the sun shone. And Jan and Max, they were telling him to believe in himself. Once before, he had accepted completely what his life had made him feel, even unto murder. He had emptied the vessel which his life had filled for him and found the emptying meaningless. Yet the vessel was full again, waiting to be poured out. But no, not blindly this time. He felt that he could not move again unless he swung out from the base of his own feelings. He felt that he would have to light in order to act now. Gradually, more from a lessening of strength than from a peace of soul, his sobs ceased, and he lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. He had confessed, and death loomed now for certain in a public future. How could he go to his death with white faces looking on, and saying that only death would cure him for having flung into their faces his feelings of being black? How could death be victory now? He sighed, pulled up off the floor, and lay in the cot, half awake, half asleep. The door opened, and 4 policemen came and stood above him. One touched his shoulder. "Come on, boy." He rose and looked at them questioningly. "You're going back to the inquest." They clicked the handcuffs upon his wrists and led him into the hall to a waiting elevator. The doors closed, and he dropped down through space, standing between 4 tall, silent men in blue. The elevator stopped, the doors opened, and he saw a restless crowd of people and heard a babble of voices. They led him through a narrow aisle. "That son of a bitch. Gee, isn't he black? Kill him." A hard blow came to his left temple, and he slumped to the floor. The faces and voices left him. Pain throbbed in his head, and the right side of his face numbed. He held up an elbow to protect him. They yanked him back up to his feet. When his sight cleared, he saw policemen striking with the slender white man. Shouts rose in a mighty roar. To the front of him, a white man pounded with a hammer-like piece of wood upon a table. "Quiet, or the room will be cleared of everybody except witnesses." The clamor ceased. The policeman pushed Bigger into a chair. Stretching to the 4 walls of the room was a solid sheet of white faces. Standing with squared shoulders all around were policemen with clubs in hands, silver medal on their chests, faces red and stern, gray and blue eyes alert. To the right of the man at the table, in 3 rows of each, 6 men sat, still and silent, their hats and overcoats on their knee. Bigger looked about and saw the pile of white bones lying atop the table. Beside them lay the kidnap note, held in a plastic bottle of ink. In the center of the table were white sheets of paper fastened together by metal clasps. It was his signed confession. And there was Mr. Dalton, white-faced, white-haired, and beside him was Mrs. Dalton's, still and straight, her face as always, tilted trustingly upward to one side. When he saw the trunk into which he had stuffed Mary's body, the trunk which he had lugged down the stairs and carried to the station, and yes, there was the blackened hatchet blade and the tiny round pieces of metal. Bigger felt a tap to the shoulder and looked round. Max was smiling at him. Take it easy, Bigger. You won't have to say anything here. It won't be long." The man at the front table rapped again. "Is there a family member of the deceased family here? One who can give us the family history?" A murmur swept the room. A woman rose hurriedly and went to the blind Mrs. Dalton, caught hold of her arm, led her forward to the seat to the extreme right of the man at the table, facing the 6 men in the rows of chair. That must be Mrs. Patterson, Miss Bigger thought, remembering the woman Peggy had mentioned as Mrs. Dalton's maid. "Will you raise your right hand?" Mrs. Dalton's frail, waxen hand went up timidly. The man asked Mrs. Dalton if the testimony she was about to give was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And Mrs. Dalton answered, "Yes, sir, I do." Bigger sat stolidly, trying not to let the crowd detect any fear in him. His nerves were painfully taut as he hung on to the old woman's words. Under the man's questioning, Mrs. Dalton said that her age was 53, that she lived at 4605 Drexel Boulevard, that she was a retired school teacher, that she was the mother of Mary Dalton and the wife of Henry Dalton. When the man began asking questions relating to Mary, the crowd leaned forward in their seats. Mrs. Dalton said that Mary was 23 years of age, single, that she carried about $30,000 worth of insurance, that she owned real estate amounting to approximately $250,000, and that she was active right up to the date of her death. Mrs. Dalton's voice came tense and faint, and Bigger wondered how much more of this he could stand. Would it not have been much better to have stood up in the full glare of those roving knives of light and let them shoot him down? He could have cheated them out of this show, this hunt, this eager sport. "Mrs. Dalton," the man said, "I'm the deputy coroner, and it is with considerable anxiety that I ask you these questions. But it is necessary for me to trouble you in order to establish the identity of the deceased." "Yes, sir," Mrs. Dalton whispered. Carefully, the coroner lifted the table at his side, a tiny piece of blackened metal. He turned, fronted Mrs. Dalton, then paused. The room was so quiet that Bigger could hear the coroner's footsteps on the wooden floor as he walked to Mrs. Dalton's chair. Tenderly, he caught her hand and said, "I'm placing in your hand a metal object which the police retrieved from the ashes in the furnace of the basement of your home. Mrs. Dalton, I want you to feel this metal carefully and tell me if you remember having ever felt it before." Bigger wanted to turn his eyes away, but he could not. He watched Mrs. Dalton's face. He saw the hand tremble that held the blackened bit of metal. Bigger jerked his head round. A woman began to sob without restraint. A wave of murmurs rose through the room. The coroner took a quick step back to the table and rapped sharply with his knuckles. The room was instantly quiet, save for the sobbing woman. Bigger looked back to Mrs. Dalton. Both of her hands were now fumbling nervously with the piece of metal. Then her shoulders shook. She was crying. "Do you recognize it?" "Yes." "What is it?" "An earring." "When did you first come in contact with it?" Mrs. Dalton composed her face and, with tears on her cheeks, answered, "When I was a girl years ago." "Do you remember precisely when?" 35 years ago." "You owned it once?" "Yes, it was one of a pair." "Yes, Mrs. Dalton. No doubt the other earring was destroyed in the fire. This one dropped through the grates in the bin under the furnace." "Now, Mrs. Dalton, how long did you own this pair of earrings?" "For 33 years. "How did they come into your possession?" "Well, my mother gave them to me when I was of age. My grandmother gave them to my mother when she was of age, and I in turn gave them to my daughter when she was of age." "What do you mean of age?" "At 18. "And when did you give them to your daughter?" "About 5 years ago." "She wore them all the time?" "Yes." "And you're positive this is the same earring?" "Yes, there can be no mistake. They were a family heirloom. There are no two others like them. My grandmother had them designed and made to order." "Mrs. Dalton, when were you last in the company of the deceased?" "Last Saturday night, or should I say early Sunday morning." "At what time?" "It was nearly 2 o'clock, I think." "Where was she?" "In her room, in bed." "Were you in the habit of in the habit of meeting your daughter at such an hour?" "No, I knew she planned to go to Detroit Sunday morning. When I heard her come in, I wanted to find out why she stayed out so late." "Did you speak with her?" "No, I called her several times, but she did not answer." "Did you touch her?" "Yes, slightly." "But she did not speak to you?" "Well, I heard mumbling." "Do you know who it was?" "No." "Mrs. Dalton, could your daughter have, by any means, in your judgment, been dead by then, and you have not known or suspected it?" "I don't know." "Do you know if your daughter was alive when you spoke to her?" "I don't know. I assume she was." "Was there anyone else in the room at the same time?" "I don't know, but I felt a strange there." "Strange? What do you mean, strange?" I don't know. I wasn't satisfied for some reason. It seemed to me that there was something I should have done or said, but I kept saying to myself, she's asleep, that's all." "If you felt so dissatisfied, why did you leave the room without trying to awaken her?" Mrs. Dalton paused before answering. Her thin mouth was wide open and her face tilted far to one side. "I smell alcohol in the room," she whispered. "Yes. I thought Mary was intoxicated." Have you ever encountered your daughter intoxicated before?" "Yes, and that's why I thought she was intoxicated then. It was the same odor." "Mrs. Dalton, if someone had possessed your daughter sexually while she lay on that bed, could you in any way have detected it?" The courtroom buzzed. The coroner rapped for order. "I don't know," she whispered. "Just a few more questions, please, Mrs. Dalton. What aroused your suspicions that something had befallen your daughter?" "When I went in her room the next morning, I felt her bed and found that she had not slept in it. Next, I felt in her clothes rack and found that she had not taken the new clothes she had bought." "Mrs. Dalton, you and your husband have given large sums of money to Negro educational institutions, haven't you?" "Yes." "Could you tell us roughly how much?" "Over $5 million. "You bear no ill will toward the Negro people?" "No, none whatsoever." "Mrs. Dalton, please tell us what was the last thing you did when you stood above your daughter's bed that Sunday morning." I. She paused, lowered her head, and dabbed at her eyes. "I knelt at the bedside and prayed," she said, her words coming into a sharp breath of despair. "That is all. Thank you, Mrs. Dalton." The room heaved a sigh. Bigger saw the woman lead Mrs. Dalton back to her seat. Many eyes in the room were fastened upon Bigger now, cold gray and blue eyes whose tense hate was worse than a shout or a curse. To get rid of that concentrated gaze, he stopped looking at it, even though his eyes remained open. The coroner turned to the men sitting 2 rows to his right and said, "You gentlemen, the jurors, are you of any acquainted with the deceased, or are any of you members of the family?" One of the men rose and said, "No, sir." "Would there be any reason why you could not render a fair and impartial verdict in this?" "No, sir." "Is there any objection to these men serving as jurors in this case?" the coroner asked of the entire room. There was no answer. "In the name of the coroner, I will ask the jurors to rise, pass by this table, and view the remains of the deceased, one Mary Dalton." In the silence, 6 men rose and filed past the table, each looking at the pile of white bones. When they were seated again, the coroner called, "We will now hear Mr. Jan alone." Jan rose, came forward briskly, and was asked to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help him God. Bigger wondered if Jan would turn on him now. He wondered if he could really trust any white man, even this white man who had come and offered him friendship. He leaned forward to hear. Jan was asked several times if he was a foreigner, and Jan said no. The coroner walked close to Jan's chair and leaned the upper part of his body forward and asked in a loud voice, "Do you believe in social equality for Negroes?" The room stirred. "I believe all races are equal," Jan began. "Answer yes or no, Mr. Alone. You're not on a soapbox. Do you believe in social equality for Negroes?" "Yes." "Are you a member of the Communist Party?" "Yes." "In what condition was Miss Dalton when you left her last Sunday morning?" "What do you mean? Was she drunk?" "I would not say she was drunk. She had had a few drinks." "What time did you leave her?" "It was about 1:30, I think." "Was she in the front seat of the car?" "Yes, she was in the front seat." "Had she been in the front seat all along?" "No." "Was she in the front seat when you left the cafe?" "No." "Did you put her in the front seat when you left the car?" "No. She said she wanted to sit up front." "You didn't ask her to?" "No." "When you left her, was she able to get out of the car alone?" "I think so." "Had you any relations with her while in the back seat that would have tended to make her, let us say, stunned, so to speak, too weak to have gotten out alone?" "No." "Is it not true, Mr. Alone, that Miss Dalton was in no condition to protect herself, and you lifted her into that front seat?" "No, I didn't lift her into the front seat." Jan's voice sounded throughout the room. There was a quick buzzing of conversation. "Why did you leave an unprotected white girl alone in a car with a drunken Negro?" "I was not aware that Bigger was drunk, and I did not consider Mary as being unprotected." "Had you at any time in the past left Miss Dalton alone in the company of a Negro?" "No." "Had you never used Miss Dalton as bait before, had you?" Bigger was startled by a noise behind him. He turned his head. Max was on his feet. "Mr. Coroner, I realize that this is not a trial, but the questions being asked now have no earthly relation to the cause and manner of the death of the deceased. Mr. Max, we are allowing plenty of latitude here. The grand jury will determine whether the testimony offered here has any relation or not. But questions of this sort inflame the public mind. Now listen, Mr. Max. No question asked in this room will inflame the public mind any more than the death of Mary Dalton, and you know it. You have the right to question any of those witnesses, but I will not tolerate any publicity seeking by your kind here. But Mr. Alone is not on trial here, Mr. Coroner. He is suspected of being implicated in this murder, and we're after the ones who killed this girl and their reason for it. If you think these questions have wrong construction, you may question the witness when we're through. But you cannot regulate these questions asked here." Max sat down. The room was quiet. The coroner paced to and fro a few seconds before he spoke again. His face was red and his lips were pressed tight. "Mr. Alone, didn't you give that Negro material relating to the Communist Party?" "Yes." "What was the nature of the material?" "I gave him some pamphlets on the Negro question." "Material advocating the equality of whites and blacks?" "It was material which explained. The material contained a plea for unity of whites and blacks." "Why, yes." "Did you, in your agitation of the drunken Negro, tell him that it was his right for him to have sexual relations with white women?" "No." "Did you advise Miss Dalton to have sexual relations with him?" "No." "Did you shake hands with that Negro?" "Yes." "Did you offer to shake hands with him?" "Yes. It's what any decent person—" "Confine yourself to answering these questions, please, Mr. Alone. We want none of your communist explanations here. Tell me, did you eat with that Negro?" "Why, yes." "You invited him to eat?" "Yes." "Miss Dalton was at the table when you invited him to sit down?" "Yes." "How many times have you eaten with Negroes before?" "I don't know, many times." "You like Negroes?" "I make no distinctions." "Do you like Negroes, Mr. Alone?" "I object," Max shouted. "How on earth is that related to this case?" "You cannot regulate these questions," the coroner shouted.